All right, so we're back working on the Raptor after a long time. We are installing a B&M transmission dipstick. And for this, the bottom line for me is just don't do it. It transmits too much noise into the cabin, regardless of adding sound deadening or isolating the dipstick. It's also very difficult to install and set up, and it doesn't really help that much with maintenance. So it's just not worth it. If I didn't pay so much for it, I'd rip it out right now. So that said, let's get to installing. For this, we will be using ForeScan, which is a whole other topic. So check the forums for information. If you don't want to use ForeScan, I don't think it's a big deal. The temp gauge is actually pretty close. You can see from this photo right here. And I think you should be fine because if you're working on a Raptor, the temperatures, it's going to be the max temperature that you can get to, period, for whenever you actually do the dipstick. The stock dipstick that you use is going to depend on your vehicle. So I'll try to find the link to the Ford maintenance bulletin that'll tell you the different types of dipsticks and how you use them. And I'll throw that in the description if I find it. All right, so the first thing I did was hook up ForeScan so I could actually keep an eye on the real-time temperature from the computer. You don't have to use a tablet. You can use a laptop or whatever you have set up with ForeScan. Again, check the forums for that. But I did want to keep it running so I can get a very accurate temperature for this while I was driving the vehicle to warm up the transmission. What I found out throughout this whole process is it doesn't matter just driving around the block and then put it in your garage and keep the vehicle running. Because I drove around for about 30 minutes. I hopped on the highway, the temperatures actually went down. Because you have the transmission cooler in the Raptor, all the temps are gonna go down by driving it. So the hottest that the vehicle actually got was while it was sitting in my garage. Ultimately, yes, you want to get all the fluid through the transmission. You want to warm it all up, but just park it in your garage after you drive it around the block and then let it sit for a little while. You'll see all the temps start to rise. The vehicle should still be running, but you need to pull off the skid plate. I believe that they're either 15, I've done this so many times, they're either 15 or 13 millimeter on the sides. And then my vehicle, for some reason, has a 10 millimeter and a 12 millimeter. I'm not sure which one is actually right. I'm guessing that whenever the dealer put all this back together, they just lost a bolt and then installed whatever they had sitting around. All right, so the stock short dipstick and that fill plug is going to be located on the passenger side right next to the catalytic converter. Again, the vehicle is running and it's hot, and it's really difficult to get up over here, get leverage on whatever you're using, whether or not you're using a wrench or you're using a socket and ratchet. it took me a really long time to try and figure this out. I ended up stopping and watching some other DIYs to figure out how to do it. You just got to do it. It's going to be tight on there. I ended up getting it with a ratchet. It's a 19 millimeter. So go ahead and use a ratchet, get it. You know, if you have a longer one that'll still fit up there, try and use that and just put some muscle into it. You got to make it happen, and hopefully don't get burned. Maybe wear some leather gloves or something if you have them. So the stock dipstick is just inside of the cap for that fill plug. And you put it in there. I did it several times to make sure that I was doing it properly, to seat it all the way down and check the fluid and make sure that I'm getting the appropriate level. These are a little difficult to read, and I'd have to look at the service bulletin again, but the vehicle's supposed to be really freaking hot in order to check this appropriately. And I could just not get it there, even with the vehicle sitting in there for, I want to say it was a couple hours with the vehicle running. I could not get it all the way up to the appropriate temperature. Here I am checking the number of lines going up there, and then I marked it with a grease pencil to make sure I knew exactly where it was supposed to be. You're gonna have to transfer this over to the B&M dipstick once you actually get it installed. So what you see me doing here is installing the lower adapter for the transmission dipstick. It's not the same size as the original dipstick, which was a 19 millimeter. This one is a 23. I'm really lucky that I happen to have a 23 millimeter wrench. It might actually be a standard size, but 23 was close enough, and it worked for me. Next thing to do is route the dipstick down the back of the engine. There's plenty of space back there. Just kind of a little challenging to get it to go exactly where you want it. But you can slide it right down the back of the engine and it'll run down to where the transmission dipstick is. Hop underneath, line it up, and tighten it down. It's actually because the engine's still running at this point. If you turn the engine off, the fluid's gonna flow out, so don't do that. Leave the engine running. But you have to get it at the right angle to actually tighten it down, and it can be a little difficult. Once you finish installing it, you need to put the dipstick in there. Make sure it goes all the way down in. It doesn't snag on anything. You're supposed to do this several times according to the instructions. It was fine. I didn't run into any issues. It went in and out perfectly fine. Also, according to the instructions and several videos that I've watched, here is where you just use a screwdriver and push self-tapping screws through the sheet metal and into your vehicle. It's not a thing. You've got to use a drill or something. I recommend, if you have a electric ratchet, to use that, because you'll be able to fit it in that space a lot better than a drill, especially because of some problems that I ran into. So right here is where everything went sideways, and it's because, if you can tell, there's no oil on the dipstick. The dipstick is not getting all the way down into the transmission for some reason, and I spent a while trying to figure this out. While I was working on that, trying to see, maybe it's the oil's there and I just can't tell, I also realized that the dipstick isn't in the right position for me to actually put in a funnel to pour in transmission fluid. So it makes it completely useless to actually fill the transmission, unless you put it farther down, which you run into clearance issues. It's too long at that point. There's just so many problems with it, but you have to slide it farther down into the firewall to make sure that you have the appropriate angle to actually pour fluid in it. So because of the clearance issues, it took me probably over an hour to actually reinstall this in the appropriate position to get a funnel in there. I don't even remember how I reinstalled it. Like I said, I think an electric ratchet is your best option. Once I actually got it in the right position, same problem. I could not get any fluid whatsoever on the dipstick. The vehicle is running. I should be able to see some kind of fluid on the dipstick. I tried it over and over again, and I probably spent another hour trying to figure out exactly what to do. I pulled the dipstick back off. I checked the fluid level using the original dipstick. I did several things, tried several different things to make it work. Ultimately, I had to tighten everything down a ridiculous amount, ridiculously tight, both tightening down the lower adapter, tightening down the tube to the lower adapter, tightening down every single part of that linkage, and it still barely made it onto the dipstick. Again, another reason why just do not do this unless you absolutely have to. Once I finally got some fluid on there, I was able to mark the fluid location with a grease marker, like you see here. Make sure that you get it accurate, right? But mark it with the grease marker. And then I had already marked, you can't really see it on the face, but on the side I had marked the OEM dipstick And then based on the Ford bulletin, I could tell where it was supposed to be, which was just slightly below that, within the temperature range. So I put another mark just slightly below where my fluid was at, and then another mark at the high fill location. I didn't know exactly what to score it with. I tried a few different methods. Ultimately, the best way to do it for me was to use a triangular file. I think these things are from Harbor Freight. They're really cheap and crappy, but a triangular file. And I was able to press down with my index finger and use the V portion of that triangle in order to scrape it. Go very slow, go in one direction at first until you get some depth, and then you can go back and forth. Just take it slow. Do not mess this up. So finally, after all of that work, I got it to a position that I was happy with. I thought I would be amazing at this and it would look fantastic, unlike all the videos I watched on YouTube, but mine looks just as crappy. I like to think it looks maybe a little bit better. But this was the first part of what was actually supposed to just be a transmission service. At 30,000 miles. Someone recommended this, so I ended up purchasing it and installing it, which I thought it would help drastically with the transmission service. Again, it didn't, and I think it would have rather pumped in the fluid through that fill port instead of doing it this way. But I bought it, I installed it. The next video that you're gonna see is the transmission pan. Hopefully I get that out. Again, hopefully I get it out quickly, because I'm actually doing a semi build right now, which should be, I have a whole bunch of video from that I need to edit also. It just takes me forever to edit and I don't enjoy it. So thank you for watching. If you want to do this, if you're still dedicated, you want to make sure that you get this installed, then hopefully this helped. But I strongly discourage it.